looking at the first chapter of Mill's Utilitarianism, the general remarks. It's actually very good to read this and take to heart this first chapter, because he basically tells you what he is trying to do in this book. And the key ideas or the key concepts here are the related concepts of foundation, first principles, and criterion. Let me actually perhaps write that down just to reinforce it. So here they are. Here are those concepts, which are very closely related. That might be helpful too. That's what he's looking for in this book, or what he's setting out, or what he's arguing for, because he believes that he's found it. And we know what it is. It's the greatest happiness principle, which of course, we're talking about morality, we're talking about ethics. The greatest happiness principle, I would say, is all of these things. It's the foundation or basis of morality. It's the first principle of morality, and it's the criterion, and really the criterion for moral judgment, you might say. And that's what he's looking for in this book, and that's sort of what he's telling us in these general remarks, is that, well, in the opening remarks, that it's a matter of some puzzlement to him that in the progress of human knowledge, sciences, natural science, logic, mathematics, the social sciences, that people still argue about the basis of morality. And this is an argument that's gone on for thousands of years in Western philosophy, and doesn't seem to be anywhere near coming to an end, although in a certain respect he's trying to bring it to an end, in the sense that he's trying to provide a basis for morality, a criterion for moral judgment, to lay bare the foundations of morality, and sort of once and for all. And we know that, that's going to be with the utilitarianism, with the principle of utility, or the greatest happiness principle. What makes an action? Well, we'll see that. We know what that is, but he introduces it in the second chapter. So that's what he's doing, I think, here. And one of the things that he points out, which is quite interesting, is that in different areas of knowledge, what he calls the sciences, and we can talk about moral science or ethics as being a science, but he's thinking of it in the same lines as mathematics or physics, that, in these other sciences, and he mentions algebra, bringing out and making clear the first principles of algebra is really not that important for algebra. I'm not really a math person, but what he's saying basically is no one really knows what the first principles are of algebra. It's all kind of mysterious, but algebra works. Ethics is not like that. Ethics is not like that in the sense that with other areas of knowledge, with other sciences, it's perfectly okay to be ignorant of or to be fuzzy of the first principles, but you're still doing the science, or you're doing, the thing properly. But ethics is not like that. Ethics, as he says here on page 3, he says, but though in science, and he's thinking of natural science, the particular truths precede the general theory. The contrary might be expected to be the case with a practical art, such as morals or legislation. All action is for the sake of some end, and rules of action, it seems natural to suppose, must take their whole character and color from the end to which they are subservient. When we engage in a pursuit, a clear and precise conception of what we are pursuing would seem to be the first thing we need, instead of the last we are to look forward to. That is, because of the special nature of human action, which is what ethics has to do with, we need to know what end or goal we're pursuing in order to pursue it. We don't need, so therefore we need to know the foundations of morality to do morality properly, we might say. We need to know the criterion for ethical judgment, which is the same thing as the first principle of morality, in order to make sound ethical decisions in a way that we don't need to know the first principles of algebra, should there be any, in order to solve an equation. That may be not completely clear to all philosophy of science. I may disagree with Mill on this, but I hope you can see the point he's trying to make. He's basically saying in order to be sure that we're actually making correct ethical judgments, we simply have to know or make decisions about what the actual basis of morality is. And again, that's what he's doing in this work, trying to give such a basis. And he knows that other people have done it before. And he knows that Kant has tried to do it. Kant is mentioned in a very interesting way here. He has a lot of respect for Kant, but there's a real criticism here of the first categorical imperative. She mentions on page 8, and basically says, Kant is a secret utilitarian. That is that the whole basis for the well, you can read it yourself. I mean, it's a very simple and clear point, basically saying that to actually apply the categorical imperative here, we have to take into account consequences, and if we're taking into account consequences, we're thinking like utilitarians, which is an interesting criticism of Kant, that he was kind of a secret utilitarian, that the first version of the categorical imperative makes no sense unless we're evaluating things on a utilitarian basis. Quite interesting. So there's a lot of talk here of a priori notions. A priori is things that are known prior to experience. And basically what he's saying, I think what he's offering here is, an a priori principle, but one that he thinks works, unlike other a priori principles, and that is the greatest happiness principle. And that brings us to the matter of proof. He'll be arguing that the basis of morality, the foundation of morality, the first principle of morality, and the criterion that we refer to in making moral judgments, that all those things are the principle of utility or the greatest happiness principle. And there is a problem here of proof, right? In the sense that what he's arguing for is a first principle. And so a first principle is a first principle. So there is a puzzle. How do you actually prove a first principle? Because if it's really a first principle, it is should be more obviously true, more self-evidently true than anything that you could use to prove it. And that is an inescapable problem. So what he'll be arguing that the greatest happiness principle is, in fact, the first principle of morality. But how do you argue that it's true? He gives you some examples here. How do you argue that health is good? How do you argue that pleasure is good? Sometimes you just have to offer things to people and see what their take on it is, whether they'll accept it without proof. But that gets us into all sorts of problems. But basically, he does think that you can argue for the principle of utility, but just not in any sort of obvious way. You can argue, you can't prove that it's true, in the sense that you can prove that something less general or less foundational is true. But you can make a case for it. You can give a rational argument in favor of it, but that certainly will not be straightforward. What you're basically arguing is that, as what we find in Mill, is that one of the things that utilitarians do in terms of arguing for the principle of utility is to say that we all use it all the time anyway. That is, that to show you, not so much to prove that's true, but to prove or attempt to prove that you think it's true because you use it all the time, whether you recognize it or not.